Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Montesquieu's Spirit of the Law. Today we're finishing the last book of part two of the Spirit of the Laws. Again, Spirit. This has been looking at the question of liberty, right? The themes of liberty, and that has been affected it in various means. The second part is from books 9 through 13. This is the last book of it, chapter 13, book 13, sorry, not chapter 13, book 13. On the relation that levy of taxes and the size of public revenues that have liberty. In other words, this chapter deals with the question of the levies of taxes and the size of public revenue tied to liberty. So let's look at the chapter 1 on the revenues of the state. The revenues of a state are a portion each citizen gives of his goods in order to have the security and the comfortable enjoyment of the rest. Have security and the enjoyment of the rest of their goods. So therefore, this is the revenues of the state are the amount of money that I need to get their security, and the ability to enjoy their goods, right? First, in order to fix these revenues, one must consider both the necessities of the state and the necessities of the citizens. So, to understand the revenues that necessary for that, we must understand what is necessary for the states and what is necessary for the citizen. One must not take from the real needs of the people for the imaginary needs of the state. So therefore, this very principle. In other words, you should take for the real needs of the state, the real needs of the government, this political function, not the imaginary. You shouldn't take from the real needs of the people for the imaginary needs of the state. That's the second paragraph. The imaginary needs are the ones sought by the passions and the weakness of those who govern, on the charm of an extraordinary project, on the sick envy of vainglory, and a certain impetus of spirit in the face of their fancies. In other words, the danger here is these imaginary needs of the state are basically, the passions and weakness of those who govern, the charm of a project that like this, the envy of vainglory, and a certain impetus of spirit in the face of these fancies of these policies. Often those who, with restless spirit, were at the head of public business under a prince, have thought that the needs of their small souls were the needs of the state. Great line. Needs of my small soul, the petty people of this, that their needs are the needs of the state. No, the needs of the state are the needs of the state. And this also deals with the needs of securing the safety and well-being of the people. There is nothing that wisdom and prudence should regulate more than the portion that is taken away from the subjects and the portion left to them. In other words, this is the subjects, people who are ruled, the people that prudence dictates that you should what? How much you're going to take away from them? Because what taxing and things is coercion, taking. It's a form of violence. It is a form of taking. So therefore, the amount of that prudence and wisdom, the portion taken away from the subjects and what is left of them. This is a question of judgment here. Public revenues must not be measured by what the people can give, but by what they should give. And if they are measured by what the people can give, it must at least be what they can uh, 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 always give. In other words, if you're going to measure what they can give, it must be what they can always give, not something they can. It needs to be measured what they can give. Should be measured. What people can give by what they should give, and if they are measured by what people can give, it must be at least by what they can always give. Right? This is the idea, this reasonableness here of this. Chapter 2. It is bad reason to say that large taxes are good in themselves. In certain monarchies, one has seen that small countries that were exempt from taxes were as poverty-stricken as the places all around them that were overwhelmed by taxes. In other words, the principal reason for this is that a small, hemmed-in state cannot have industry, arts, manufacturing, because it's hampered in 1,000 ways by large states that enclose it. The large states have industry, manufacturing, and the arts. It makes and it makes regulations procuring all advantages for itself. Therefore, the small states necessarily become poor, however few imposts they have levied there. Right. So therefore, this idea of size does matter. Size and access. That if you don't have the proper size, if you're a small society, if your state or society is small, you can't have the big industry. It's not going to happen. And therefore, the big states are going to dominate you in that sense. Yet it was concluded from the poverty of those little countries that there must be heavy burdens in order to make the people industrious. Right? This is that in other words, there must be burden. It was concluded that from the poverty of those little countries that there must be heavy burdens in order to make the people industrious. One would have done better to conclude that there must be none. All the wretched people from the surrounding areas withdraw to the places and do nothing, already discouraged by overwhelming work. They make their whole felicity consist in idleness. In other words, you don't overdo them. If you overtax them and overdo them, then that actually leads them to do nothing. In other words, this idea we need to make people's industrious, you have to make more burdens on them. No, the opposite is the case. The effective wealth of a country is to fill all hearts with ambition. The effects of poverty is to bring them into despair. Ambition is excited by work. Poverty is consoled by laziness. So this is interesting. Wealth brings ambition. Poverty does not bring ambition. It brings despair and laziness, right? That ambition leads to work. Poverty leads to not doing anything. Nature is just towards men. She rewards them for their pains. She makes them harder workers because she attaches greater rewards to greatest work. But if an arbitrary power removes nature's rewards, the distaste for work recurs, and inaction appears to be the only good. So therefore, if an arbitrary power comes and takes nature rewards, right? This nature is just as people. So people who work, there's reward for it. But if an arbitrary power takes away people's work and takes away them the pleasure that takes away from them their work, they will not work. They will simply revert to inaction. Chapter 3. On taxes in the country where part of the peoples are slaves to the land. People are slaves to the land. Slavery to the land is sometimes established after a conquest. In this case, the slaves who cultivate the land should be sharecroppers of the master. Only the sharing of loss and gain can reconcile those who are destined to work, those who are and those who are destined to enjoyment. In other words, the owner of the land, whoever that master is, they have to be the control of this. And it needs to be, in other words, it's taxes and this stuff. Therefore, the taxes must be paid by the master in that sense. Cannot really that. Therefore, in the slave who cultivates the land should be a sharecropper of the master. Only sharing of loss and gain can reconcile those who are destined to work with those who are destined to enjoyment. Right? That's the favorite end there. Right? Chapter 4. On a republic, in a like case, right? The similar situation. So that this is now looking at a republic. When a republic has reduced a nation to cultivating its land, one should not tolerate the citizens increasing the tax of the slave, increasing the tax of the slave. It was not permitted in Macedonia. It was thought that the helots would better cultivate the land when they knew that their servitude would not increase. It was believed that the masters would be better when they desired only what they accustomed to having. So therefore, you don't add extra burdens to slaves. Because why? Because then they'll not produce more. In other words, they're adding burdens to them. Why should they produce anything in that sense? Therefore they leave them alone. Don't tax them in that sense, because that's why. Because that's chapter 5 on monarchy in this like case, right? In a monarchy, when nobility has the lands cultivated for its profit by the conquered people, again the ground rent must not increase. Okay, just don't increase the ground rent. However, it is well for the prince to be satisfied with his domain and with military service. In other words, the prince should be just satisfied with his domain and with military service. The cost of this. Don't extravagance. Don't push things. But if the prince wants to levy taxes in silver on the slaves of his nobility, the lords must stand warrant for this tax, pay it for the slaves, and collect it back from them. And if this rule is not followed, the lords and those who levy the revenues for the prince, each in his turns, will harass the slave and will, one after the other, collect from him until he perishes from poverty or flees into the woods. In other words, destroys the thing. In other words, the slaves will just starve to death, and then or they flee, try to escape because it becomes so. It's destructive. It's ruinous. You say. Chapter 6, on the despotic state in like case. What I have just said is even still more indispensable in the despotic case. The lord who can be stripped of his lands and his slaves at any moment are not inclined to preserve them. Peter I, wanting to adapt the practice of Germany and levy his taxes in silver, made a very wise regulation that is still observed in Russia. The gentleman levies the assessment on the peasant and pays it to the Tsar. If the number of peasants decrease, he pays the same amount. If the number increases, he pays no more. Therefore, it is in his interest not to harass his peasants. And therefore, this is, in other words, don't harass your peasants. What is true about the republic and the monarchy is even more true about the if you because if you if you the serf of lands, you just demoralize them to make they have nothing to gain. They'll just do nothing. They'll just die or they'll flee. Right. Chapter 7 on the taxes in countries where slavery to land is not established. In a state when all the individuals are citizens, and each one of these possessed by his domain, which the prince possesses by his empire, imposts can be placed on persons, on lands, on commodities, on two of these, or on all three together. So therefore, this is a question. It was not slavery or possessed by them. Imposts can be placed on persons, on land, or commodities, two of them, or all three. In respect to the impost on person, an unjust proportion would be one that followed strictly the proportion of goods. In Athens, all the citizens were divided into four classes: those who received 500 measures of liquid or dry fruit from their goods paid 1 talent to the public. Those who received 300 metrics from them, half a talent. And those 200 measured 1 mina, or a sixth of a talent. Those of the fourth class gave nothing. The assessment was just, although it was not proportional. If it did not follow the proportions, follow the proportions of good, it followed the proportions of needs. It was judged that if one had an equal physical need, that physical necessity should not be assessed. That the useful came next, and that it should be assessed. But at least then the superfluous, and that the size of the assessment on the superfluous prevented superfluity. In other words, it's too much of this, growing too much. The assessments on land registers are made for the various classes of lands, but it's very difficult to recognize these differences, and still more difficult to find people without an interest in failing to recognize them. Therefore, there are two kinds of injustice in this case: the injustice of the man and the injustice of the thing itself. But if the assessment is not excessive in general, if the people are left plenty for necessities, the particular injustice will be nothing. But if, on the contrary, the people are left strictly with what they have in order to live, the least disproportion will be the greatest consequence. So therefore, this is why if it's not going to affect their survival, then it's the harm is not that great. But if it's going to affect their ability to survive and like that, then even the least disproportion will be greatest consequence, right? If some citizens do not pay enough, there is no great harm. Their plenty will always revert to the public. In other words, if some citizens do not pay enough, there's no great harm because if they have extra, they'll pay to other people. If some individuals pay too much, their ruin turns against the public. So, in other words, you make too many people, their ruins can make them. This harms the public score. If the state matches its fortunes to that of individuals, the plenty of the individual will soon make its fortune increase. Everything depends on the moment. Will the state begin by impoverishing its subjects in order to enrich itself, or will it wait for its subjects to enrich it at their own pace? Okay, this is the question. This is just a question. Will state impoverish its subjects to enrich itself, or will it wait for the subjects to enrich it at their own pace? Will it have the first advantage or the second? Will it begin by being rich, or will it end by being so? In other words, this is the question: is the purpose of this is again the security? In other words, it's not just about being rich or having assets. It's surviving. Okay? The city must survive. The must survive. So therefore, will it die because it's rich? That's what's the purpose? If you're going to destroy the city, it's wealthy, but it will be destroyed because no one trusts it and everyone hates it, right? Duties on commodities are the ones least felt by the people. So that's what is interesting. In other words, the ones on persons, land, these are felt. That commodities, VAT, this is what the VAT tax is, right? These are the least felt by the people because no formal request is made from them. They can be so wisely managed that the people will almost be unaware that they pay them. That's the VAT, value added tax, is a perfect example of this. People don't even realize they're paying in Poland 23%. Okay, this is what people pay in the VAT of most commercial goods. Okay, so they don't even really they don't see the tax that way. They see it, but it doesn't really affect them. In America, the sales tax is felt after you get the price is that, and then after the receipt, you see it, you feel it. The general sales tax is kind of a different thing because the price is listed there, and then you feel the tax. In Europe, the listed price includes the tax, so you don't really feel it in that sense. So therefore, some people like it, but this is why. Imagine in America if you had 23%, what riots there would be, right? Well, that's what he's saying here. If you feel it, then you resent it. If you don't feel it, it doesn't really impact them, right? They are will be almost unaware they pay it. To this, it is the greatest consequences that it will be the one who sells the commodity who pays the duty. So in this situation, the sells the commodity pays duty. He well knows that he is not paying for himself, and the buyer who ultimately pays it confounds it with the price. Okay, this is the. Some writers said it was that Nero removed the duty of 1/25 on slaves who were sold. Yet he did no more than order the seller would pay it instead of the buyer. This regulation, which left all the impost, appeared to have been removed. So again, this is the appearance of removed. But the seller is, if you make the seller do it, the buyer doesn't feel it. So a tax that makes the buyer sell it, they'd be aware of it. But that's the problem here. There are two kingdoms in Europe where very high imposts have been put on beverages. In one of them, the brewers alone pay the duty. In the other, it is levied alike on all the subjects who drink. In the first, no one feels the severity of the impost. The second is regarded as onerous. In the former, the citizens feels only his liberty in not paying. In the latter, he feels only the necessity that obliges him to pay it. Furthermore, in order that the citizen pay, his house must be perpetually searched. Nothing is more contrary to liberty than those who establish these sort of imposts have not the good fortune of having discovered in this regard, the best kind of administration. In other words, if you're going to keep on searching people not paying, this leads to the destruction of liberty. Chapter 8: How the illusion is preserved. In order to make the price of a thing, the price of a thing and its duty become confused in the head of the one who pays, there must be some relation between the commodity and the impost, and one must not charge excessive duty on a product of small value. There are countries where the duty is more than 70 times greater than the value of the commodity. In this way, the prince removes the illusion from his subjects. They see that they are led in an unreasonable manner, and this makes them feel every bit of their servitude. So therefore, that's why you must hide the taxes. They feel the taxes, and they feel their servitude, right? And it must be unreasonable. It can't be unreasonable. Besides, for the prince to be able to levy a duty so disproportionate to the value of a thing, he must sell. He must sell the commodity himself, and the people must not be able to buy it elsewhere. In other words, this is subject to drawbacks. If he's going to hide such a high thing, he can't buy it elsewhere. No competition. So monopolies, right? This is monopoly. If you have a high price, I'm going to control the thing, and I'm going to have a high markup. I have to be the sole distributor. No one can compete with me. As fraud is very lucrative in this case, the natural penalty, the one reason demands, which is confiscation of the commodity, becomes incapable of checking it, because especially because the commodity ordinarily has a very low price. Therefore, one must have recourse against extravagant penalties, like those inflicted for the greatest crimes. This removes all proportion and penalties. Men who could not consider men who one could not consider wicked are punished like scoundrels, which is the thing in the world most contrary to the spirit of moderate government. In other words, you have to treat people who are in other words, people who are decent, who are not wicked. You have to treat them like they're wicked. And this is what he says. This is completely contrary to the spirit of moderate government. I add that the more opportunities that such a people are given to defraud the tax collector, the more the latter is enriched and the former are impoverished. In order to check fraud, tax collectors must give extraordinary means of harassment, and all is lost. In other words, in the situation, if you make the things if you do it too much, your tax is too high. If the tax you're charging for things like this are too high, then you have to, it becomes unreasonable, because then what happens? More and more people will defraud the tax collector. And therefore, the more the latter is enriched, the former is impoverished. And therefore, in order to check fraud, then it must have extreme power, and then everything's lost, right? Chapter 9, on a bad sort of impost. We shall speak incidentally of the impost established in some states on the various causes of civil contracts. In order to protect oneself from the tax collector, one must have a vast knowledge, as these things are subject to subtle examination. So tax collectors, the interpreters of the prince regulations, exercise an arbitrary power of fortune. Experience has shown that an impost on the paper on which the contract is to be written would be much better. So therefore, instead of the contract, just tax the paper. Don't tax the contract. Tax the paper. Don't not the contract. This leads to what? Chapter 10. On the size of the tax depends on the nature of the government. Taxes should be very light in despotic governments. Otherwise, who would want to take the trouble to cultivate the land? Moreover, how can high taxes be paid in a government that does nothing to replace what the subject has given? Given the stunning power of the prince and the strange weakness of the people, there must be no ambiguity about anything. Taxes should be so easy to collect and so clearly established that they cannot be increased or diminished by those who levy them. A portion of the fruits of the earth, an assessment by head, a tax of some percent on commodities are the only suitable ones. So therefore, despotic governments cannot tax much, cannot demand much. because there's no means to do it. In other words, it's just they demand. People won't work it. People won't do anything. In that sense. It is well in despotic governments for merchants to have a personal passage of safe conduct, and for usage to make them respected. Otherwise, they would be too weak in discussion that they might have with an officer of the prince. So therefore, that's what. Oh my God, that would be. In other words, they need to give them promise of protection of this. That for the prince's subjects, just take things of them. Okay. On chapter 11, fiscal penalties. A peculiar of fiscal penalties is that contrary to general practice, they are more severe in Europe than in Asia. In Europe, commodities, sometimes even ships and vehicles, are confiscated. In Asia, one takes neither the one or the other. This is because in Europe, the merchant has judges who can protect him from his opposition. In Asia, despotic judges would themselves be the oppressor. What would the merchant do against the pasha who has decided to confiscate his commodities, right? This harassment defeats itself, and one sees it constrained to be somewhat gentle. In Turkey, only one entry duty is levied. After that, the whole country is open to merchants. False declarations result neither in confiscations nor in increased duties. In China, packages that belong to the people who are not merchants are not open. Fraud among the Mongols is punished not by confiscations, but by doubling of the duties. The Tatar princes who live in Asian towns levy almost nothing on the commodities that pass through it. And if in Japan the crime of commercial fraud is a capital crime, it is only because one has reasons for prohibiting all communications with foreigners, and because fraud there is an infringement of the laws made for the security of the state rather than of commerce. Therefore, the Japanese rules aim at security of the state and don't want foreigners to be. They want to prevent foreigners, people from engaging in foreigners to disable this. In other words, inside factions within the thing might turn to a foreigner to help them against the other power. They want to stop that. Therefore, the infringements of trade is really designed for this. It's not regulating commerce; it's about regulating the security of the state in that sense, right? In chapter 12, in relation to the size and the relation of size of taxes to liberty, general rule. One can levy heavier taxes in proportion to the liberty of the subject, and one is forced to moderate them insofar as servitude increases. In other words, the more free the people, the more you can demand of them. The less free they are, the less you can demand. This is a general rule. This has always been and it will always be. It is a rule drawn from nature, which does not change. This rule is found in all countries, in England, Holland, and all the states of decreasing liberty down to Turkey. Switzerland does not seem to conform to this because no taxes are paid there. But the particular reason is known, and it even confirms what I said. In those barren mountains, food is so dear in a country so heavily populated that a Swiss pays 4 times to nature what a Turk pays to the Sultan. Dominant people such as the Athenians and the Romans can free themselves from every impost because they reign over free subjects. So they do not pay in proportion to their liberty. This is because in this regard they are not a people but a monarch. Okay, right? Therefore, they are more a monarchy. That's a general rule. So Athens and Romans, these are dominant people. They control other peoples, and therefore they don't have to pay. Their citizenry doesn't have to contribute to this. Their citizens, because they're a monarch. They're really the people of that regime are a monarch who can take from subjects. But the general rule still holds. In moderate states, there is a compensation for heavy taxes. It is liberty. In despotic states, there is an equivalent for liberty. It's modest taxes. In certain European monarchies, there are provinces that, by the nature of their political government, are in a better position than others. One always imagines that they do not pay enough because, as a result of the goodness of their government, they could pay even more. But it keeps coming to mind to take away the very government that produces the good that is communicated, that spreads afar, and that it would be better to enjoy. In other words, they could take more, but that would take away the good government. So therefore, this is monarchies. Monarchies are you have to be monarchies. The provinces that are like certain better because the province like this. One always imagines they do not pay a tax. This is because of the goodness of their government. Right? They could pay more, and it keeps coming to mind to take away the very government that produces the good that is communicated, and that spreads far, and that would be better to enjoy to keep the government there. Right? So therefore, it's the maintaining of the good government is more important than maybe making more revenue. Chapter 13, in which government taxes are susceptible of increase. Taxes can be increased in most republics because the citizens, who believe he's paying to himself, has the will to pay them, and ordinarily has the power to do so as a result of the nature of the government. So therefore, the republics will put up with taxes because they're paying it and they're benefiting of it. In other words, they feel that I'm paying myself. So therefore, they see the benefit, they feel the benefit of it, they will do it. In monarchies, taxes can increase because the moderation of the government can procure welfare. It is a kind of reward to the priest for his respect for laws. In other words, monarchies, taxes can increase because of his moderate nature. So the more moderate, the people tolerate it, but they see the benefit of the taxes in that sense. Because of the moderation of the government can produce wealth there. The wealth generates. In other words, the wealth is produced. Wealth is produced, and therefore there can be a slightly increase in revenue in that sense, right? And this is a reward to the prince for his respect to the laws. That produces the possibility. In a despotic state, they cannot be increased because the extreme servitude cannot be increased. In other words, the despotic state, they cannot be increased because their servitude is already so extreme that it can't be increased anymore. Chapter 14, that the nature of taxes is relative to the government. Okay, the nature of tax. An impost by head is most natural to servitude. So per capita taxes is the most servitude. The impost on commodities is most natural to liberty because it relates less directly to the person. So therefore, per capita is the most imposing servitude. The less commodity taxes, they impose less on the persons directly. It is in the nature. It is natural in despotic government for the prince not to pay his militia or the people in his court in silver, but to distribute land to them, and there are consequently few taxes levied. For if the prince pays in silver, the more natural tax he can levy is a tax by head. This tax can only be very modest, for as one cannot make various classes of wealthy taxpayers because of the abuses would result. Given the injustice and the violence of the government, one must necessarily be ruled by the rates that the poorest can pay. Okay, so therefore you have to put. In other words, there's not going to be wealthy people because these people would be threats to the thing that everyone is poor, everyone's a slave. Therefore, only the people who can pay the lowest can. This will be the revenue that will be able to make of this. And the tax natural to moderate government is an impost on commodities. This impost, really paid by the buyers, although advanced by the merchants, is a loan the merchant makes to the buyer. Thus, the trader must be regarded as both the general debtor of the state and the creditor to our individuals. He advances to the state the duty the buyer will eventually pay, and he has paid for the buyer the duty he has paid for the commodity. Therefore, it is felt that the more moderate government, the more the spirit of liberty reigns, the more secure fortunes are, the easier for it for the merchant to advance substantial duties to the state and lend them to individuals. In England, the merchant lends the state 50,000 pounds sterling for every barrel of wine he receives. What merchant would dare do this kind of thing in a country governed like Turkey? And if he dared to do it, how would he be able to? With a suspect with a suspect, uncertain, and ruined fortune. In other words, this is the idea. The English are able to do this, pay this tax in this way because the rules are enforced, the laws are enforced, and therefore he can make money, he can enjoy it, and then he can get the money for this and pays the system. But if Turkey, where the rules are just arbitrary and things like this, he couldn't do it. Wouldn't work. Chapter 15, the abuse of liberty. The great advantage of liberty have caused the abuse of liberty itself. So therefore, the liberty produces the abuse of liberty. Because moderate governments have produced remarkable results, this moderation has been abandoned. Because large taxes has been raised, one wanted to raise excessive ones, and disregarding the hand that liberty the hand of liberty that gave this present, one turned to servitude, which refuses everything. It's metaphor. He's saying that, in other words, liberty produces this wonderful thing of wealth. Then I get greedy. I want more and more, and then therefore you start using. The more I take, the more coercion I must use, and therefore people don't have, because large taxes have been raised. One wants even more things to do this, right? Wants excessive ones, and therefore I disregard the liberty gives that revenue. Here it says, and one turns to servitude, and servitude produces what? No one has it to give anything. It refuses everything. Right? So the condition of servitude means I don't have it, right? Liberty has produced excessive taxes, but the effects of those excessive taxes produces servitude in their turn. And the result of servitude is produce a decrease in taxes. In other words, that if I create the servitude and the debt, and there's less prosperity, and therefore I get less revenue. Therefore, I need to reduce taxes to try to recruit things. The monarchs of Asia make edicts about almost nothing except the exempting each year of some provinces of their empire. Such manifestations of their will are kindnesses. But in Europe, the edicts of the prince cause grief even before they're seen, because they always speak of the need and never of ours. In other words, they speak of their needs. The edicts in other words, the Asian princes do this out of kindness. Europe, these edicts of the princes, the edicts are done because the prince needs money. The prince needs it for some good. From an inexcusable listlessness that the ministers in these countries get from their governments, and often from their climate, the people gain the advantage that they're not constantly overwhelmed with new demands. So this is the Asian states, right? This is talking about Asia. Expenditures there do not increase because there are no new projects, and if by chance there are some, they are projects whose ends can be seen, not in projects just beginning. Those who govern the state do not harry because they do not endlessly harry themselves. So therefore, they do not hurry or do something because they don't themselves decline. But for us, it is impossible to have regularity in our finance, because we always know what we shall do something, and never shall we do it. So therefore, but for us, it is impossible to have regularity in our finances, because we always know that we shall do something, but we never do it. So this is the problem. Those who govern the state do not harry it in these Asian climates, right? And therefore, we don't really know. But for us, it is impossible to have regularity in our finances, because we always know that we shall do something, but never what we shall do. Among ourselves, we no longer consider a great minister to be one who dispenses public revenue wisely, but rather one who is an industrious man who finds what they are called expedients. In other words, I'm able to find. In other words, it's that industrious man who finds mechanisms to make things, deliver services for less, or something like this. Expedients, right? In other words, it's not who dispenses this wisely, but is an industrious man who is able to do more with less, or expedients, and that's what are called expedients, right? 16. On the conquest of the Mohammedans. These excessive taxes account for the strange ease with which the Mohammedans made their conquests. Instead of the continuous succession of harassments derived by a subtle avarice of the emperors, the people saw themselves subject to a simple tax that was easily paid and was similarly accepted. They obeyed a barbarian nation more happily than a corrupt government under which they had suffered both all the drawbacks of the liberty they no longer had and all the horrors of the present servitude. So therefore, this is the idea that this is why I explained the Mohammedans were the empire of the East, the Roman Empire, the Byzantines. This was corrupted. This was started. They had no longer had liberty, right? And they were servitude, and they had high taxes and high prices. Now, what happens? The Mohammedans come in simple tax. You're just taxed for being a heathen, and therefore it freed them in that sense. This is what explains the conquest. Why Muhammad. This is the success of that. Not by it freed them from the oppression. They were no longer they weren't made any less servitude. They just no longer the Mohammedans took less from them or demanded less from them in that sense. Chapter 17 on the increase of troops. On the increase in troops. A new disease has spread across Europe. It has affected our princes and made them keep an inordinate number of troops. It redoubles in strength and necessary becomes contagious. For as soon as one state increases what it calls its troops, the other suddenly increases theirs, so that nothing is gained nearby but the common ruin. In other words, this is true. Each monarchy keeps readily all the armies he would have if his people were in danger of being exterminated. And this state in which all strain against is called peace. Now, whose 13 is what? This is. It is true that the state of effort which perpetually maintains the balance because it exhausts the great powers, right? Thus, Europe is so ruined that if individuals were in the situation of the three most opulent powers in this part of the world, they would have nothing left to live on. We are poor with the wealth and commerce of the whole universe, and soon, as a result of these soldiers, we'll have nothing but soldiers, and we will be like the Tartars. Okay, this is for this one must make use of new inventions of militia established in almost the whole of Europe and push them to the same excesses with the regular troops. So therefore, the idea of instead of relying on at this time, the maintaining standing armies were very expensive, and that they were an extensive cost, and that they had to be maintained by kings. And that's why the idea of militias of citizens that were tied by local communities and paid for them by themselves. This is what this idea of this in that sense. The great princes, not content to buy troops from smaller ones, seek everywhere to buy alliances. That is almost always to lose their silver. So therefore, the great prince is not content to buy troops from smaller princes. Seek elsewhere to buy alliances. That is almost always lose their silver. Right. The consequence of such a situation is the permanent increase in taxes, and that which prevents all remedies in the future is that one no longer counts on the revenues, but makes war with one's capital. In other words, this is interesting. In other words, the constant situation is that the permanent increase in taxes, which prevents all remedies in the future, is that one that no longer counts on the revenues, but makes war on their capital, because these capitals is being consumed. Right. It is not unheard of for states to mortgage their lands, even during peace, to ruin themselves by means they call extraordinary, which are so highly extraordinary that the most deranged son of a family could scarcely imagine them. So therefore, this is go so much in debt, so much in things, having the security of things. This is this kind of weird idea that he's talking about. This is the danger of this situation of having builds of arms. He's arguing against the arms race in that sense. That the cost of these things will lead us to. There has to be a reasonable. In other words, this leads us to that the situation of the opulent empires of the world. It ultimately what they would consume everything and only have soldiers. Right? Everyone is soldiers. So it's not unheard of states to mortgage their lands, even during peace, and ruin themselves by means of extraordinary, which are so highly extraordinary that the most deranged son of a family could scarcely imagine. Therefore, this is in other words, why are they doing it? It's this madness, he says here, and this is a danger to this. This is the danger in that monarchies and princely states could have, and even republics to some degree. But he doesn't. This is monarchy saying on the remission of taxes. The maxim of the great Eastern Empire that taxes should be returned to the province that have suffered could well be brought to monarchical states. In other words, if you're going to be taxing them, the people that suffered from the money should go back into those states. There are many places where this is established, but more are overwhelmed than if by. But more are overwhelmed than if it were not established. Because since the prince does not vary his levy, the whole state becomes jointly responsible. So therefore, this is a danger, right? Therefore there are many places that are established, but the more overwhelmed if it was not established. Because why? If the levy is uniform, then some states will be overwhelmed, right? The whole state becomes jointly responsible. To relieve a village whose payment are deficient, one burdens another that pays more. The first is not restored; the second is destroyed. The people grow desperate between the necessity of paying from fears of extractions and the dangers of paying from fear of surcharges. Right? A well-governed state should put in the first item of its expenditures a regular sum for fortuitous cases. In other words, a government state should take revenue from cases where there's going to be some people going to not be able to pay and be able to deal with this, right? In other words, for fortune or accident. Okay. In this, the public is like those individuals who ruin themselves by spending exactly the incomes from their lands. In other words, you're not preparing for accident. You're not being cautious. Okay. In other words, anyone who just consumes what they produce. This is bad. This is not good governance. A well-governed state should be put for fortune, for bad situations, bad times. In regard to the joint responsibilities among the inhabitants of the village, this has been said to be reasonable because one could assume a fraudulent plot on their part. But where one has found that, based on a supposition, a thing that is unjust in itself and ruinous for this for the state has to be established. In other words, if you make this people responsible, in other words, in regard to the joint responsibility among the inhabitants of the village, this is reasonable because it assumes that there's a plot on their part, right? But when the supposition is that they're doing this unjustly, and this is dangerous because what happens if this bad luck goes there? Right? But where one has found that on a supposition, a thing that is unjust in itself and ruinous for the state has to be established. In other words, it has to be not only unjust but also ruinous to the state. Something unjust but not ruinous to the state is not necessarily going to be bad in that sense. But something that is both unjust and ruinous for the state has to be established for there to be kind of punishment of the inhabitants in that sense. Chapter 19. What is more suitable for the prince and the people? Tax, farming, or direct taxes? Okay. Tax farming or direct taxes? Tax farming is hiring someone that they make the money, they collect you, they give you sell, they give you the money, and then they go up and collect money, and that they get to make profit from it, right? Direct taxes are the administration of a good father. Direct taxes are the administration of a good father of a family who levies his revenue himself with economy and order, right? With direct taxes, the prince is in charge of hastening or delaying the levies, either according to his needs or according to those of his people. With direct taxes, he saves the state from immense profits made by tax farmers, who impoverish it in infinite ways. With direct taxes, he saves the people from grievous spectacles of sudden fortunes. With direct taxes, the silver levied passes through few hands. It goes directly to the prince and consequently reverts more promptly to the people. With direct taxes, the prince saves the people from the infinity of bad laws that are never extorted from him by an importunate. In other words, this is an avarice. In other words, this impropriety means improper avarice of the tax farmer whose present advantage lies in the regulations that are fatal for the future. Make the money now, take as money as possible, and therefore you pay your fee to the emperor. I make more money now. Since the one who has silver is always the master of the one without, the tax farmer is despotic even over the prince. He is not a legislature, but he forces him to give. He forces him to give laws. So therefore, this is the thing. The tax farmer is kind of able to do. The tax farmer is able to do his silver, his collection of money, his revenue, to force the prince to make laws favorable to him, because the prince needs the money, right? I admit that it is sometimes useful to begin by farming out a newly established duty. There are arts and inventions for warding off fraud that are that the interest of the tax farmer suggests to them, and that agents could not have devised. But once the system for the levy is made by the tax farmer, direct taxes can be successfully established. So therefore, in other words, you might have to, in the beginning of something, okay, create the incentive. But in other words, it might be useful that the arts and inventions for warding off frauds, tax farmer has more interest in doing this. So you create the tax farmers might be useful at the beginning of a reign or establishing something. But once it's established, right, taxes can be directly established. In England, the administration of excise and the revenue from the post office, as it is today, was borrowed from that of the tax farmers. In republics, the revenue of the state are almost always from direct taxes. So monarchies tended to, the contrary establishment was the great vice of the Roman government. So the Romans with their tax farming, this was does the Roman Republic. In despotic states where direct taxes are established, the people are infinitely happier. Witness Persia and China. Okay, like direct taxes in that sense, right? The unhappiest of those are the one where the prince farms out his seaports and commercial towns. The history of monarchy is full of the ills caused by tax collectors. Nero, indigent at the harassment of the plebeians, formed in the impossible and magnanimous project of abolishing all imposts. He did not devise direct taxation. He made four ordinances that the laws made against the plebeians, hitherto kept secret, would be published, that they could no longer exact what they had neglected to demand during the year, that a praetor would be established to judge the praetor's claims with no formality, and that the merchants would pay nothing for ships. Those were the halcyon days of this emperor, Nero. These four ordinances, how he did things, right? He did this. Now, last but not least, chapter 20 on tax collectors. All is lost when the lucrative profession of tax collecting. All is lost when the lucrative profession of tax collecting, by its wealth, comes to be honored profession. This can be good in despotic states, where their employment is often part of the functions of the government themselves. It is not good in a republic, and a similar thing destroyed the Roman Republic. It is no better in monarchy. Nothing is more contrary to the spirit of this government. Disgust infects all the other estates. Disgust infects all the other. Honor loses all its esteem there. The slow and natural means of distinguishing oneself is no longer have an effect, and the principle of government is stricken. So both monarchy, this is clearly monarchy, right? The monarchy is this destroys honor, right? In past times, one saw certain scandalous fortunes. One certainly saw scandalous fortunes. It was one of the few calamities of the 50 Years' War. But at that time, this wealth was regarded as ridiculous, and we admire it. Every profession has something. Every profession has some things as its lot. The lot of those who levy taxes is wealth, and the reward for this wealth is wealth itself. Glory and honor are for that nobility which knows, sees, and feels no good except honor and glory. So honor and glory are for those that nobility knows, sees, and feels no real good except honor and glory. Respect and esteems are for those ministers and those magistrates who, finding only work upon work, watch day and night over happiness of their empire. So therefore, this is not tax collectors just make wealth. There's no honor in tax collecting. This is why they're very dangerous in that sense. They become great wealth, but then they become dangerous in republics. This can destroy tax collectors can destroy the republics. They become onerous. They can work in despotics only because they're the power of the governor in that sense. There are two of the governors, a mechanism of despot. But in other words, that one saw in the past, during 50 Years' War. But at that time, this wealth was regarded as ridiculous, and then they admired it in that sense, right? Every profession has something as its lot. But it's no, every person has a lot, something that's tied to it. To those who levy taxes, it's wealth. Can't be glory and honor. Glory and honor requires therefore what? Those who feel no good except glory and honor. Therefore, respect and esteem are for those ministers whose magistrates finding only work upon work, watch day and night over their happiness. They get honor, they get reward, not wealth. Wealth, it becomes something suspect and something like this. So that's how we end this chapter. Any question or comment you guys have about anything that you've heard about, you want some more elaboration on, please put them below, and when I see them, I'll respond. If you liked it, like it, and share it with a friend, share it with a buddy, put it on social media. You got to get it known. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and get others to subscribe. Let's grow a little bit. If you didn't like it, you can thumb down, but say why in the comments. What you didn't like about this, maybe I've learned something, right? You can, if you want to find me on social media, links are below. Follow me on social media. The links are below. If you want to help me doing what this doing, we've been doing, just does take time and energy. You can do it. You can follow and you can join by Patreon or Subscribestar. Who knows? There's maybe other means, but but you don't do anything for us. Well, I will if there's something. You ask for something, I'll do something for some kind of project or something. Also, if you want to help, you can buy my books are below. The links to the books are there. That's another way you can help me if you want to do something. Again, these posts, my Montesquieu posts are being done Mondays and Wednesdays. Tuesdays and Thursdays, some other topic might be brought in there. Currently, I'm doing finishing Schmidt up. And then Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central European time or 12 noon Eastern Standard Time are the live streams on Friday. Okay, I'm hoping we can restore them. We had a little accident one time. I'll try to do it. I'm having some issues with the connection, but we're trying to do it. That's what always the problem with live streams. Okay, dokie. Well, that's it, and I will see you again soon. Next time we meet, we start part three. We start with part three. We'll look at book 14. And I think this is the climate book, I think, if I remember correctly. But okay, we'll see it. Take care and have a good day. Bye bye.